Hey guys, welcome back to the Becoming Anchored podcast. This is episode 4. We're so glad that you're here. If you're back with us, welcome back. If you're new, welcome. We are really getting in the groove with this podcast, and we're just loving sharing with you guys our life and our therapy knowledge and sparking curiosity with y'all. So, yeah, I'm Lauren Jackson.
And I am Laura Deneen. Welcome.
Yeah, we're two therapists in the Brentwood, Tennessee area. We are in a group private practice. We work with eating disorders, grief, anxiety, depression, life transition, everything in between, all through the lifespan. We adore our work, and we are really falling in love with this platform as well to kind of expand where we get to share that work a little bit. So yeah, welcome, and here's to episode 4.
Yeah. And so when we originally started this Becoming Anchored podcast, we wanted it to be a time, first and foremost, where we can share about our lived experiences as humans. And then we get to also share a little bit about the wisdom that we have from being therapists. And so we are really just here to do life with y'all. We really wanted this to be conversational and authentic. And so we're here to share about our experiences both as a human and then as a therapist. So that's really the purpose of the Becoming Anchored podcast. We're going to be giving y'all homework at the end of each episode, along with an affirmation for you to take with you.
A quick disclaimer, as always, this is not intended for therapy by any means. The intention of this podcast is for informational purposes only. If you feel like you could benefit from therapy after listening to our content, please feel free to either reach out to us if you're local or find someone local to you.
Today, we are going to be talking about diet culture, particularly as we are about to go through a seasonal change. So I read a post somewhere and it was like, happy 475th day of January, which I don't know if you felt that way, Lauren, but we've had quite a bit of weather here in Nashville, from snow to rain. And it's just been, the snow was fun for like the first 3 days, but then it just was cold. And so anyway, I'm really excited about spring and summer coming. But with that, we acknowledge that there's also an opportunity for more diet culture in our lives. And so here at Anchored, we treat a lot of disordered eating disorders, and even people that just want to talk about their relationship with food or their bodies. So they may not have an eating disorder, but they want to improve their relationship with food and their bodies. They're ready to really be at peace with both of those things. And so we thought it might be helpful just to talk through diet culture, and we hope that this can be pertinent whether or not you're listening during a seasonal change, because I think this can hopefully be applicable no matter what time of year it is. But yeah, the summer months are coming, and so I know with that comes more opportunity for diet culture messaging to show up. Mm-hmm. When you think about diet culture, Lauren, I'm just curious your take on this. Like, are the first few words or phrases or things that come to mind for you?
When I think of diet culture, I'm a very image person. So I learn best by seeing, and I process best by kind of having images that help me express what is going on. And so the first, the image that comes to mind when I think of diet culture is a monster.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, diet culture for me is really anything that is sold to you to try and convince you that who you are right now, where you're at right now, what you look like right now, what you weigh right now isn't good enough for the sake of making money. That is what diet culture feels like, just a big marketing kind of scheme, if you will. And then within that, that's maybe a kind of big umbrella. And then within that, there are just all kinds of messages and messaging that diet culture spews at us that again continues with that narrative of where you're at right now, who you are right now, what you look like right now, what size you are, what shape you are, what you weigh isn't good enough.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I hear either I'm not good enough or something's not good enough, I hear like flavors of shame in that. So,
Yeah.
just that implied message or explicit. So I talk to clients about both those two types of messaging. So implied is like maybe it's not said out loud, so it's an implicit message, but you feel something is kind of off and it makes you feel a certain way. That can be an implied message versus more overt, explicit, said out loud messaging. Diet culture is everywhere. Like Lauren said, it's just this idea that certain bodies are better than others, that there's something wrong with you, or that you can always be in the process of trying to improve yourself or change something about the way you look. You guys might have heard of this, but the idea of like the thin ideal. So like putting a certain body elevated, kind of on like a pedestal. Diet culture is also present when people face discrimination because of their bodies. So, whether it's weight discrimination or fat phobia, diet culture is everywhere. I mean, I literally was in the grocery store to grab something quickly recently and already saw like a magazine for like summer's coming. This actress lost so X number of pounds. And, it's in your face everywhere. It can be from seeing a magazine in the checkout line to hearing your Uncle Joe talk about what new diet they're on and how maybe you should start that too. I mean, if you start to think about where it is in your life, it's truly everywhere. And for people that are trying to work on their relationships to food and trying to cultivate a more peaceful relationship with food and or their bodies, that can be really tricky to navigate. Just this kind of implosion of messaging that feels never ending.
So diet culture can, like Laura's saying, is always kind of in our face, is pushed a lot in a lot of different areas and platforms, if you will. And it's also very sneaky and over the years has kind of taken on new names and has kind of morphed into some different looking packaging to make it seem like it's less harmful, which for those of us who have high radar to diet culture don't buy into that and want to educate people on the sneakiness of it. And that sneaky piece of diet culture can show up a lot in just kind of the everyday conversations we have with people and what maybe sound like kind of harmless comments that are made. And I think one of our hopes and purposes of this episode today and just kind of the content we want to share with you guys and our lived experiences with this is to help you all kind of filter and discern and identify maybe even some of the more sneaky aspects of how diet culture shows up just kind of day to day in those conversations and the things we hear from people at the store, at the wherever we're at. This showed up for me not too long ago, coming into the new year. And then like we're talking about now, that the season change going into spring and summer can elicit a big diet culture response of like getting ready, getting beach body ready and kind of detoxing from all the holiday food and right, like those kinds of words are some of the sneaky ways that diet culture is less overtly presented. And so anyways, back to my story, I was in I was at like a little workout class, and it was before the class had started, before the instructor came in, and there were some other ladies kind of standing near me. I was just stretching, kind of just grounding myself, if you will. And this was not too long after Christmas. This was kind of early January. And I heard these two women talking. I certainly wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were just right there and I could just hear what they were saying. And one of the women, well, I'll get to this point in a second, but one of the women, she made some kind of comment about, I still have some Christmas to shut off or something like that. It was like language along those lines. And I had a bit of a reaction to it for a few different reasons, and I'll share those reasons. But my reaction, it was less of like a grounded response and more of like a reactive response. If I'm being like just totally honest with you guys, I like had a pretty big eye roll and kind of like a pretty big like because I wanted them to hear me. Like I wanted to make an impact, and how functional that was, I don't know. But again, just being open about the reaction I had. And then they went on and they talked about something else and all the cookies, and they're just there. And so you eat them all, and just, again, pretty covert diet culture-y messaging that cookies are bad and too many is a bad thing and makes this bad thing happen and all of that. And so I had another big eye roll, and then the class started and I was like, thank God. So that's just an example of like how it just is there, just all the time there. And
yeah.
And I think a couple of reasons why I had a response like that is because I go to these little classes a few times a week because they are just it's self-care for me. It's a time when I can step out of my house. It's a way that I found that I enjoy moving my body. There have been other seasons in my life where I've moved my body in a way that I didn't love, but I made myself do it anyways, and that was unhealthy for me. And so being intentional about finding a way of moving my body that feels joyful, that feels invigorating, that feels good to me has been really, really important in just my life journey. And so I was trying to get into this mindset of like me time, self-care, being mindful. And then this like nonsense is happening in the peanut gallery. And I'm like, come on. Right. So that was just annoying. Like, you're messing up my vibe over here, ladies. And these two women were very thin women. And that just felt unjust to me. Something about that felt unfair. And so I think those couple of reasons is what elicited my reaction and my response. And so that's part of what we're wanting to like explore and be curious with you guys today about is, okay, identifying diet culture, particularly the sneakiness of diet culture, and then what all we need around that when it does show up for us. What are we feeling? What do we need? What support do we need? What do we do? I maybe could have done something differently. I did go home and share it with my husband, which was really helpful. And he just laughed and rolled his eyes and so that was just helpful to say it out loud. But that was just like a pretty recent experience I had. And I knew that we were going to do an episode on diet culture, particularly like just in the new year and going into spring. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a perfect example.
Yeah. And I think you told me about it last week too. Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing. And unfortunately, this kind of thing is just so common, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I can totally understand, like, you're busy and you wanted that space just to be in your kind of own little self-care bubble. So I totally get, I mean, it sounds like your response was frustration, and maybe underneath that was some anger, right? And just validating that that is an appropriate response to diet culture, right? So if we think about the emotion itself of anger, I've had to really work on my relationship to anger, just like giving myself permission to feel it in a way that is healthy, and like I'm able to like ride that emotional wave. And so I am here for it, and I'm glad that you let yourself feel that anger, because I think it's so healthy. And then you did something about it, right? Like you told me about it, you told your husband about it. But yeah, if you think about what information that anger gives you, right? It's like you mentioned the word unjust, right? So something about this feels unjust, or you're crossing a boundary, or when I think of anger, it's like, okay, is there something that needs to change, right? So if I'm angry at someone, do I need to have a conversation with them, or do I need to speak to the instructor at this class? And, I'm not saying that you need to do that, but it's like, it informs us of what action steps we can take. And so I think sometimes with diet culture, it can feel like so much. I think a normal response too is shutting down to that, but remembering that we have agency in that, and that anger can actually create agency for us to make changes.
Totally.
And I have to remember that. I have to remember that too, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like tackling diet culture is a huge task, but every conversation that we have, every person that we kind of share about what diet culture is another formative moment towards a better culture and a better world that we're leaving for our children, right? So I think sometimes I can be like, oh my gosh, like what is the point of trying to tackle diet culture? But yeah, I mean, that anger can help guide us towards
Totally
tackling this like beast that diet culture is. Back to your monster metaphor, like yeah. I think of it like a beast, a monster. But yeah, I mean, like Lauren said, there's like so much advertising. It is a lot, and there's nothing wrong with making money, but making money off of people's insecurities is what diet culture does, right? And which is like just like mind-boggling to me. And so yeah, I mean, as the seasons change, I know that a lot of our clients feel pressure to look a certain way, and so we're just here to say it's okay for you to opt out of that. But with that, like Lauren said, identifying what you need. So I know we have a body image group starting soon. So can you join a local group where you can talk about what's hard about the spring and summer months, especially, or diet culture in general? Do you have your safe people that like are like-minded and get it, that you can return to after you have a negative experience with diet culture? That would be my first recommendation. And then of course, a therapist and dietitian, if that's available to you. People that you can decide, I don't know, what boundaries you need to set, whether it's with harmful people in your life or colleagues or friends that maybe are not in the same space in terms of working, in their relationship with food or their bodies. But there's lots of different things that we can do to support ourselves, especially when the messages feel strong. Anything come into mind for you?
No, I was just curious if you've had a recent experience at all with diet culture, like encountering anything.
Yeah, I
know that
oh my
you had
gosh.
mentioned at the grocery store, like seeing magazines, which, yeah, that's like every day, all the time, right?
Yeah, and like we can become a little bit numb to it, but it's like still problematic. Like I forget that I live in this bubble of like colleagues and friends who are like very much in the anti-diet space. And it can feel, like I was talking about before, disheartening to try to like tackle it. But there's something about the magazines in the grocery store that just really makes me angry. I'm not sure what it is, but I mean, I think it's just the content of like, hey, I'm checking out my food. And then I don't know, but it just really bothers me. Yeah, I mean, we were at a birthday party recently. So of course, lots of kids' birthday parties. And one of the women there, I think her daughter was asking for a cookie, and she was like, no, that's too much sugar and it could cause cancer or something like that. And I did the eye roll thing too. And I don't know these people. I I think there's lots of different options around how we can handle it, right? Like, and I'm still thinking through what that's going to look like as Marianne gets older, right? Like, I don't love that she hears that now, and she's not yet talking. I don't think she can fully digest like what that means. So I took the route of processing with my husband in the car, and then, you know, I can get support from you, from other people in my life that get it around this cookie supposedly causing cancer. That's a whole nother like episode. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, my reaction was one of just anger. I mean, if you think about a kid's birthday party, right? We're there to celebrate that little one's like precious life. And it's just like, my first thought was like, okay, person, you're ignorant and you're kind of ruining the moment. And your precious child is so vulnerable to that, right? So if you think about like the amount of fear that's in that statement alone, so sugar causes cancer. If I'm a little child, like, how do you think that that impacts me, right? So I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that children are adults and they're not, and that they can think through things in a rational adult-like way when their sweet little brains are just not developed. And so that makes me angry too, is right. Like, this little girl, like, just wanted a cookie. And for the record, they were delicious. I had a couple. But it's like, okay, first of all, you don't know that's not actually factual information. You're saying something from someone that you found online, and you're robbing the moment in this birthday party that's supposed to be one of joy and celebration. And you're making it about fear and anxiety, and you're also making the assumption that your daughter knows how to cope with that type of statement when they just like totally don't.
Yeah. So it's like so multifaceted, like so many like things happening internally when one silly little statement is made. And one of the themes that I'm like hearing as we're both sharing some of our experiences is this theme of anger. Like, there's something and that word unjust keeps coming to mind, which as I'm just kind of putting some of my thoughts together around this, I feel like one of two things happens when diet culture is in the mix, whether it's a commercial or a magazine or a conversation that is being had. I feel like if we're kind of in that anti-diet space, like you and I are, and the profession we're in, or if that's just like the place you're at in your life, we feel anger. Like we feel angry, and we feel a sense of like, what do I do? Like, how do I change this? Or maybe, which I've been here, or we maybe are perhaps, well, maybe three different things happen. So that, or we're maybe still in kind of this vulnerable place of like, perhaps internalizing it and like, oh, is this true? Like, do I need to do something different? Am I wrong? Is what I'm doing bad? Or maybe we're fully immersed in diet culture and we're on board and we agree. And none of those things are wrong or bad or whatever. I think it can just be helpful to know where we kind of land when it comes to how we do respond or internalize or engage with the diet culture talk or language or whatever that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have options in that moment, right? Like, and we're not against people that are on diets. Like, we just want to throw that out there. And we're against diet culture, right? And so Lauren and I are more aligned in terms of what we believe than maybe somebody who's in the thick of diet culture. We see that as a mechanism of avoidance for an emotional state that's happening internally, right? But we're not against the people. We are against diet culture, right? And so I think that's an important delineation to make. And then, yeah, I mean, we have options in those moments. At that birthday party, I had worked a long week. It was my weekend. I didn't really have the capacity to address it. I most likely will not see this person again. And so they're not in my everyday life. I have done quite a bit of therapy around diet culture and how I want to show up when it's presented or in my face or whatever. And I chose not to respond, but that was what I needed in that moment. I think I certainly have worked with clients that, want to respond and want to assert themselves. And that's one way that they're working through their own recovery from living in a diet culture world. And I 100% support them with that too. And I have certainly done that at times. And I think, Lauren, you've even been there in moments when I say it going toe to toe, but where I've gone a little bit more toe to toe with people in my life that maybe don't agree with all the, health at every size and whatever, food freedom in the ways that I do. And so I certainly have done that, and neither response is good or bad. It's really more about what you need in that moment. But yeah, there's so much more we could say. As the seasons change, there's just times of vulnerability, I feel like, that are maybe amped up, if you will, throughout the year. And I know that's one of them. So we just really wanted to address it today. So just to give y'all some homework, and just to, really quick, before I give y'all homework, we will probably continue talking about this because there's a lot more that we could say. This is really just like a small little tidbit of information. If you haven't really heard about the concept of diet culture, we talk a lot about it in blog posts on our website. There's certainly lots of wonderful resources that we can put in the show notes around starting your journey to tackling diet culture. But yeah, y'all's homework is twofold. So number one, I want you to think about the ways in which diet culture shows up in your life. So like we talked about, maybe ways that are a little bit more obvious, and then ways that are less obvious, so more sneaky, like Lauren referenced. But think about how it shows up. That could be a conversation that you had. It could be a magazine. It could be a TV show you watched, whatever. And then I want you to think about how you're going to respond to diet culture showing up, and what your options are. So this is, I think, one way that we can move through some of our emotions about diet culture, is really giving ourselves options in terms of how we respond. So that's your homework from today's episode. Lauren has an affirmation for y'all.
Yeah. So like Laura said, we have a lot of blog posts on our website addressing diet culture, amongst many, many other topics. But I wanted to share a little quote from one of our most recent blog posts on opting out of diet culture in 2024, which is quite relevant, right? But actually, so our wonderful Laura wrote this blog post, so go check it out. But the affirmation that she leaves us in this blog post says, "I find strength in community and support, recognizing that I am not alone in my journey towards self-acceptance." So community, support, and you're not alone feel very timely in this discussion about diet culture.
Yeah, thanks for being here on the Becoming Anchored podcast. We will see y'all next time.
Bye, guys.